Liftoff. Oh, we're a little bit, our screen's a little off center. And we're live. Awesome. Welcome, everybody, to the Visto Show for January the 29th, 2021. Ken, thank you very much for coming on the show today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, Josh. Good chat again. Get you
Absolutely. It's
realigned. There we go.
awesome. Yeah, what we're going to do today is, Ken and I have been in touch for quite some time now. Obviously, another respected professional in Canadian immigration, decades of experience in the space. So what I wanted to do is number one, hear a little bit, a little bit more about Ken's story, and then also talk about Canadian immigration. Talk
Sure.
about what the heck happened in 2020, and what we can might think about or what we would like to see in 2021. But just to kick us off, Ken, can you give us a little bit more information just about yourself, your background, and what you're working on right now?
Yeah, God, goes back 20 years at this point, so 2 decades. I characterize myself as I would hardly ever call myself an immigration expert. I think as soon as someone says that to you, you should turn and walk the other way. It's impossible, I think, especially in this environment, to be an expert per se, and certainly not globally. So I've always described myself as a workforce solutions I wouldn't say expert, but certainly professional. A lot of my early career was around recruitment and mobility. So if you look at my profile on LinkedIn, you'll see that for a long time, for early days, I was actually at the University of Alberta. I was running a food and beverage department. So I ran several business operations there. And that was a really strong experience for me. It was a classic thing, going through university, bartending your way through school and all that. But graduated, got given the keys to one room. And then over time, I ran the entire department, had 600 employees, QP contracts, all kinds of fun stuff, right? So a really good business education, particularly in a very complex environment. I'm not sure if you've ever had an experience working on a university campus, but it's bureaucracy in spades, right? So really good experience. But left that and moved into the world of recruitment. It may seem like kind of a weird jump, but when you consider the context, I had within the U of A at points 500, 600 staff members, and it was cyclical, right? So you were perpetually hiring. And more importantly, you were doing a big push towards back in the summer to get ready for the fall semester, right? So recruitment was a really key piece, so was HR. And I left the university and moved into professional recruitment and joined what was the Manpower Group at the time, in Manpower Professional, and stayed with them for about 7 years, doing a lot of very specific technical recruitment, a lot of engineering work, and increasingly became involved in immigration through that time. If you think of the context, the timing, that's back when the oil sands was really starting to grow dramatically, and I remember at one point we're looking at the charts and looking at the projects that were on the books and the manpower required, and there were not even enough people in Canada to fill the need, let around Alberta. So, a lot of the focus with my time at Manpower and then subsequently with Air Energy, now or Swift, was really focused on international recruitment and mobility, right? So, spent 7 years with the Manpower Group, lots of clients like Shell and similar, and then moved into Air Energy, which is now Air Swift, and running their Canadian operations. But again, very immigration, very mobility focused, right? So, we were dealing with clients like Imperial, Shell, Chevron, Conoco, and all these guys. And even though you may have a project that's based here in Canada in the oil sands or Eastern Canada, the work is rarely just in Canada, right? You'll have a project team in Houston, you'll have a project team in the UK, you may have a project team in Japan, all over the place. So, the companies were responsible for finding individuals for these teams, but then also managing their mobility across the globe. So an individual may have a need to be in Canada for, 6 months, but then got to get down to Houston for, 10, and then they've got to go across to someplace in Europe to, oversee more work. So it was perpetually moving people around the world, right? So that's really where my background in immigration comes from. And was in that space for a lot of years. I ran Air Energy, Air Swift in Canada for 10 years. We had spectacular growth, great group, and some great clients throughout that time. Left them after a merger and then did some consulting for a while. And ultimately, landed in Newland Chase, and a long story around that, but ended up taking over the Canadian operations and running that for the better part of 3 years. And pure play immigration, global firm, largest, as far as I know, I think still the largest independent immigration firm, sort of outside of, the Fragments and the big four. And again, a really good experience, really interesting time to join that company because they were in a massive growth curve, and certainly, we grew the Canadian operations quite dramatically as well through that time. I think we're up 170% while I was there, at least on the EBITDA side, more on the revenue. And then decided to do my own thing. That was always part of the game plan. And that's really what I've been focusing on for the better part of the last year. So
Right.
similar, right? Inbound Canada work. But I've also got this global network that I've been, building for years, both while in Newland and prior, and really having a lot of fun working with all those folks, right? So nice opportunity to run my own thing, but also to continue to work with people I've known for years around the globe. And that's, the really positive things. We're all lifting each other up.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
especially in the last year, there's a bunch in there, Ken, that I need to dig into. My first
Okay.
question is it fair to assume then that most of the work that you do now is it more on the corporate side?
It's funny about that, right? Because I'm sure, well, from what I know of your history, I'm not sure you would have had the same kind of experience, but possibly similar. When you're working in corporate, a lot of what you're doing is you're moving people into Canada as CFWs. They're here for a short window of time, initially, with a view to working through a project or, you know, um, moving their career path forward. But eventually that means they're looking for PR, right? You don't tend to come to Canada and leave, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not always true, right? I did find that over the years, the U.S. contractors would more typically return back to the U.S., particularly guys from the South. But broadly, you tended to see a lot of folks that just wanted to make Canada their home. So while your focus may initially be corporate, you're also doing all this additional work, helping people get their PR, right, and helping them find pathways, and then ultimately helping their families. So if you look at our business right now, it's certainly very skewed towards the corporate side, but we do a ton of work with individuals as well, and the two cross over,
Right.
right? Because
Yeah.
the pathway that a lot of what I was doing over the course of the last 3.5, 4 years was helping companies that were struggling with the U.S. Right, so group out of the U.K., group out of Holland, group out of India. They're looking to get expand into North America. They want to get into the U.S., but they can't. They can't. The H-1Bs are not getting through. Et cetera, et cetera. So Canada as a viable alternative, and I know I've talked about this with Global Skill Strategy and GTS. It's a great opportunity for people to set up a base in North America, and then also expand into the U.S. and wherever else they want to, or simply be based here. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the work they've been doing is really on that piece. So I've got partners that help with incorporation and HR programming and all the rest. So it's
Right.
it's really an ecosystem to support that. So it helps these folks that are looking to come in, and it's also just another pathway, right?
Absolutely. And totally agree. I mean, I had a call right before this one with a company that I helped a few years ago, and all of
Yeah.
their TFWs, the work permits are coming up for expiration, so we got to figure out the next steps there. So 100% agree with you on that one. Ken, I'd be interested to know a little bit more about when you're working, in corporate for companies.
Yeah.
How involved did you get in the immigration part? Did a lot of these companies have in-house immigration experts? Was it a lot of just working, just here, law firm, like take the paperwork and deal with it? I have a feeling probably most companies do it a little bit differently, but I'm interested to hear about what that dynamic is like.
Yeah, normally it's so Newland Chase is a good example, right? Team of between 10 and 15, all RCICs, at the time anyways, while I was there. My role was really about overseeing the business. So it was really the business of the business. But, over 20 years, you amass a pretty significant amount of immigration knowledge. So the processing was not something that I was doing directly,
Mm-hmm.
but the team was doing. So my role was working with the clients and the team to ensure the solution was appropriate and the structure was appropriate. And 99% of the time, our team was doing all the processing, all the filing for them, right? So we were really a plug-in through their network, either directly or through an RMC, right, or those kinds of relationships. But yeah, we were typically doing all the processing for them. Yeah, they would still have mobility team members, obviously, but those groups are, a lot more focused on coordinating the activities on the client side, not taking care of the filing in country, right? It's my experience anyways. I mean, there's not really a whole lot of point in engaging with a firm if you've got, that kind of a team that's doing your own in-house processing, right? Why would you go outside?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep, that makes sense. And so let's talk about 2020, right? Fun year, lots to talk about. And correct me if I'm wrong. Was it the beginning of 2020 when you started your business formally?
Yeah, and if people give me the like, what on earth are you thinking? Right? Pandemic, and you're opening an immigration firm. Well, to me, it actually was really good timing for a couple of reasons, right? Because um, for a short window of time there was really so much uncertainty that there really wasn't a whole lot you could do, and it was a great time to get set up, right? So just taking care of the mechanics, getting the business structured. So I certainly spent some time doing that Q1 last year, and then got everything finalized, and we started moving forward from there. But I think what was particularly interesting was um, how people were starting to deal with being remote, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we've talked a lot about this in various forums, but I think there was just a really profound change in mindset, right? So here you go, you've got all these folks that are historically used to being in corporate, they're used to being in their offices, they're used to doing things in a very particular way, right? And if you were doing a meeting with somebody, you were getting suited and booted and going and doing the big presentation, the big deck and all the rest. But now you get a situation where most of your contacts are at home, they're juggling kids, dogs, full 9 yards, working at a kitchen table, no idea what the future holds, and really just have a different perspective on what they're willing to accept, right? So all of a sudden, a Zoom call is totally fine. In fact, it's not fine, it's required, it's the only option.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was just a really profound openness that happened kind of Q2 and Q3. I think that's fading a little bit now, but I really did see that it was a lot easier to connect with people. And I also saw that a lot of people were becoming really frustrated with how some of their suppliers were working. So you saw a lot of folks that may have relationships with the big four just throwing up their hands because they can't get a hold of anybody.
Mm-hmm.
There's connectivity issues on several fronts. You've got, your suppliers are putting people on furlough. You've got them working on all kinds of crazy schedules. And I remember talking to one client, and they're saying, yeah, they put an inquiry in, and it took 3 weeks to get a response.
Mm-hmm.
Right. By contrast, they literally could just, ping me and I'm picking up in 2 minutes and we're having a conversation, job done. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
I think you saw a lot of that, right? You saw a lot of people retreating back to who they know and who they trust because they had that access. So it was a pretty, for me anyways, it seemed like it ended up being a really good time to launch because people were a lot more open to, playing with somebody different than, the big corporate machines that are out there. My take
Absolutely.
anyways.
Yeah, no, and I've heard it from others, and I've kind of experienced myself, especially the first part you mentioned about being easier to connect with people.
Yep.
Now, people who were used to sitting in offices, having their friends to talk. I mean, number one, just more willing to kind of do business over Zoom, but also just you're stuck at home by yourself. Even if you have some family, it's tough to sit head down and do work the whole day. It's almost nice to like work in a little bit more networking calls
Sure.
just to get you through the day. So I totally agree with all of that. Now it'll be interesting to see if we remain stuck inside for a while. Like you said, will that fade? I don't know. It'll be interesting. I'd love to hear as well, Ken. What were your thoughts on? And this is going to be a broad question to start. We can get down into the weeds, but how did you think that Immigration Canada handled COVID in 2020? And you can kind of take that however you want, right? Because they had to do a lot of stuff, right? There's a lot that we could evaluate. But I've had a lot of opinions. I've shared a lot of thoughts on LinkedIn and stuff, and you have, and it's a
Yeah.
topic I really like to discuss with other people who've been working and being in the industry throughout mess that was 2020.
Yeah, I think, God, where do you start? Um, you know, I think we did some things right. I think we closed late. We should have moved a lot faster and harder. But it's and not to put it all, um, on the immigration side. I mean, it's a comprehensive issue if we're just talking the
Hmm.
COVID side, right? So I think, we probably recognized the challenges late and just really didn't clamp hard. And, certainly we did a better job than our neighbors to the south, and there's a lot of reasons for that, obviously.
Hmm.
Um, and we won't go there.
I don't think so. Yeah, I left
No,
that off the agenda.
yeah, that's good. But it's interesting when you look, and I'll just sort of compare and contrast a little bit. When you look at the countries that did, I think, really well, they tended to be countries that had a culture around compliance, right? And, following government direction, so where I'm thinking, Korea, I'm thinking Japan, I'm thinking Taiwan, surprisingly, so immediately adjacent to China, and yet they did very well. But, and that's a really good example, right? They've been through these kinds of things before, and they built a really robust infrastructure for dealing with it, and made sure that all the relevant departments were connected, and really put control into the hands of supply chain people, the people that are used to managing these kinds of issues, very, very military like structures. And as soon as they saw it starting to happen, they just flipped the switch, and immediately the structure changed in terms of who had control, and everything fit within that. As a result, they did really well despite having an amazing number of flights going back and forth between mainland China. So, I think given that we're a Western culture, I think we did relatively well. I think we just could have done more faster. So that's one piece. Um, I think how we handled our border, now you start getting into issues of access and what's appropriate, and now you start talking about, the travel side. So what's the impact on the aviation industry and the tourist industry? And I mean, I'm looking around. I mean, I look outside my office window and I've got the mountains right there. I live in tourist communities, so we saw that the pain of the hospitality sector and the tourism industry getting hammered. I think unemployment in this region was up to 90% at one point in the peak. Oh yeah, it was crazy, right? So, well, you think
Wow.
about it, Banff and Canmore, it's like going to Whistler, right? Like literally everything's kind of shutting down until things kind of got under control. And, Canadians realized, well, we can't really go anywhere else. We might as well stay locally. So we started to see, a swelling of tourism just within the domestic population. But I do think that we did quite a good job in terms of controlling entry. And I think, the mindset of, only essential travel coming in with exemptions was good. And I think that path is still a smart path. I think we're now just into a bit of a weird zone because of the UK variants and the continued spiking. My God, Alberta at one point, I think we had the most cases in Canada, outstripping Ontario, right?
Jeez.
And again, not to get too political, but largely down to the foibles of our provincial government, right? We're not exactly in the best place from that perspective, at least not in my opinion. It's starting to come back, and I think you're going to see the measures tighten up in the near term, and then we'll get back on this track of, loosening by drip feed. People say, well, the Canada's borders are closed. Well, they're not, right? And you know this. It's
Hmm.
actually fairly porous as long as you know how, right? So, you simply can't come in as a visitor as a rule, and there's certain exemptions around that too. But I do think we did a fairly good job, and I think the path we're on is still good, right? If you look at
Hmm.
where, the transmissions and the spread are, there's certainly a component that's coming in from outside, but, really the bigger issue is just our own population, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I have a few thoughts. One of them being if you don't follow Ken for immigration and mobility stuff, definitely follow him for the pictures because as someone who lives in downtown Toronto, I don't get views like that very often, so I
Yeah.
appreciate seeing those. And I agree with a lot of what you said, especially on the travel side of things. I think the country did fairly well. Where I think actually Canada did the best was in managing specific types of programs, and they were quick to provide extensions to submit certain types of documents, right? We just saw another extension.
Oh, the student thing, yeah.
The extensions for students, allowing students to start online. A lot of those
Yep.
programs and exceptions and exemptions, I think, were really well done from the kind of like the letter of the law of the programs and eligibility and stuff like that. So
Yep.
I would definitely give a big kudos in that
And
department.
one of the things that just going back to the student side, one of the parts of the program that really struck me as amazing was, when they opened it up so that international students could enter, there was no filters, right?
Mm-hmm.
They could easily have made that a lot tighter in terms of where people were coming in from, but it was wide open. And I
Yeah.
thought that was a pretty interesting move, like kind of shocking given all the precedents, right?
Well, it's interesting. The way they actually filtered it was from within Canada, meaning you
Yeah.
had to be coming to a school that was approved by their own province. But as you said, the country that you're coming from has no bearing, which is very interesting. That might be a concern to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I don't really know. The other thing I'll add is, we've never seen something like this anywhere close to it, especially in North America. And so, like, I remember even hearing rumblings about it in February and into March and saying, oh, this will be over in a week. And so maybe some of the people at the top thought that too, right? Oh, there's no way this is going to be a global pandemic, so maybe we shouldn't
Oh,
shut down soon enough. I don't know. What do you think?
no, I remember talking to some buddies of mine, because a lot of my life was, conference circuit, right? So ERC, Euro, all these things, like perpetually trying, particularly with Newland. And, these guys were heading down to one of the conferences I would normally attend. I think it was in California. And they were joking about, yeah, well, we're just not going to handshake, and maybe we won't go to the buffet, right? And like that, and in hindsight, you look at this going, oh my God, you just had no clue, right?
Absolutely.
But that's just what the perception was early days was that, yeah, okay, it looks like it's becoming kind of a thing, so we might have to be a bit more careful, and everyone kind of jokingly accepted
Mm-hmm.
the new conventions. But this, like, I remember this was probably late February, I think. People were still going to conferences.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Before you know it, like, just everything completely exploded. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think there is that, right? There's the how serious is this going to be, and how serious do we need to play? But again, I come back to some of the Asian countries where they saw this instantaneously, said, no, we're killing this. We're just going to shut this whole thing down right
Yeah.
now, and we'll suffer the consequences for a short window of time. And if it is a short-lived situation, then so be it. But it's better
Nip
safe
the
than sorry.
bud.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly.
right.
Exactly.
Look at New Zealand.
Yeah. Awesome, Ken. Well, I just have one or two more questions.
Sure.
I want to talk about 2021, right? I mean, so
Sure.
far it's, at least for my end, very much the same. It was great to see this new open work permit for the post-grad work permit holders, but
Yeah.
I'd love to get your thoughts on what do you see in terms of 2021? Do you have any thoughts? What do you think the prospects of immigrating to Canada are for people that are outside of the country that might be thinking of coming here? This could be, individuals coming on a study permit, or companies looking to expand or move workers. You can take that however you'd like.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in sort of two streams, right? So let's talk about it from the corporate side. So, obviously, all those applications are still being processed, so companies should still be walking down the road to get that done, because, timelines are 12 to 18 weeks, depending on what you're looking to do, right? So I think you still need to be walking down that road. And I do think, even though we're going to see some near-term challenges, there's all the rhetoric right now about, increasing the quarantine times, requiring people to be in hotels and stuff. So I think we're going to see some near-term tightening, and probably quite significantly. And it was interesting. I was just watching some media last night, and lots of calls for throwing up the provincial barriers as well. Never mind the international side.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting, right? Canadians calling for provincial barricades. Okay.
Who would have thought? Yeah.
Yeah, but I still think that you're going to see it becoming more difficult in the near term. So one thing that I see as a bit of a conflict is, you saw the pilot program for Alberta, right, where you could reduce quarantine, and that program was, I'm trying to remember the time. There was a 26-week program, I think, that was started here late October, and the intent was that it was going to work its way across Canada and just be this flip switched in various locations, right? And Pearson would be an obvious one. I know they were doing some testing protocols, but that's a real question mark right now, because you've got this opportunity to short circuit quarantine, and now you're putting in heavier quarantine messages. So I can see that thing literally being put back burner, but that's a key, right? Like, I think there's a lot of plans that are in place, and maybe I'm giving the feds more credit than is due, but I do believe there is a very clear pathway that they've got articulated in the background, and they're literally throwing switches, as the timing is right. The problem is we've now got this, UK variant and other variants that are coming in that are causing massive scares. So, I think we're seeing this clampdown that's going to occur for a window of time. But as the vaccines start becoming, more prevalent throughout the populations, not just here but globally, I do see, the numbers dropping down more, and this being less of a concern. So you're going to see near-term pain, tightening in terms of quarantine and related entry issues, but then I think that softens, and I think you see that timing is going to be the question mark. But I think as we're getting close to the summer, we're going to be in a much better place. Presumably, vaccinations are going to continue, even with the recent hiccups with Pfizer and all the rest of it. But I do see that we're going to get more continued opening. I also think for those people that have got awarded their PR, that there's going to, I'm thinking particularly folks that are sitting outside Canada and can't complete that last piece to get their PR card. I'm pretty sure that there's a program that you're going to see coming out that will facilitate that remotely, because that's been a key barrier, right? You'd be sitting there and you've got no way to come into Canada to complete and enter. And I believe that there is a program that's going to be out there. So there's a portal that they've been doing for folks that are in Canada to make sure that gets handled. And I'm pretty sure that gets expanded across our border. So I think that's one of the mechanisms that's going to help, hit the targets for 2021. Right. You and I have been back and forth a bit around, whether we can actually hit that magic 400,000.
Right.
Increasingly, I think they can, but they also need to get their resources up. And the minister has said, yeah, we're adding more resources, we're adding more technology. Well, let's see the results of that, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's see some processing times coming down, etc. But I do think we're on the right track, and it's going to be interesting to see how things are revealed over the next, couple of months.
Absolutely. So last question, let's say you're an individual, you're outside of Canada, maybe you're in your 20s, 30s, considering maybe a study permit, PR, express entry. Do you think 2021 is still a good opportunity in terms of moving that process forward?
Great opportunity. Well, you've been tracking, the scores, right?
Yeah.
You see arrest threshold's been dropping. Going to continue, I think. And it's interesting. I was going to spend some time, analyzing the numbers in terms of, who's in the pool and how much is there versus how much, we're awarding, just to see if you could sort of spot the trend. And I would presume that we're going to see, that downward trend to a degree. But again, if, it's kind of like building more roads, right? More people come. So I don't know how much the score is going to fluctuate. What's your take on that? Because I know we've had a little bit of back and forth on that, but you've been pretty non-committal about where you think the score is going to end up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the reason why it's so tough to peg a specific score is because now they're going back to CEC, Canadian Experience Class only draws.
Yeah, I saw that.
But the good thing is that whether they've been doing CEC only draws or when they go back to all program draws, they always trend down.
Yeah.
And the other really important thing of note that people often overlook is it's actually the score requirement is less important than the number of people they're applying. And in the last 2-3 months, they've been doing record-setting draws. The average has been 47, 48, 4,900, which is a lot of people. So I think it's a really good sign.
That number, if you run the numbers against, they're looking at doing 100, 110 through express entry. Those numbers play out that they're actually maintaining that goal, right? They do.
Yeah. Right before January, when they were doing all program draws, they were doing multiple 5,000 person draws. So there's 2 a month. So that's 10K, 10,000 people a month times 12. That's 120,000.
And they threw some wild cards in there too, right? It wasn't always a 2-week gap. Wasn't there some additionals that were thrown in?
There was a hiccup. They claimed it was due to technology. So there was a change. There was a tweak in the number of points they're giving for people with a French language exam.
Right.
And so they had to change the score, and that resulted in a delay, a 1-week delay in one of the draws. And so the subsequent draw was done just 1 week later.
Right.
So it was a little bit wonky there, and it did throw the scores off. But I think it's really promising, not just because of these things we're talking about, but because if you look at Canada relative to other countries, right? Maybe you're thinking about immigrating somewhere, Canada, the U.S., the
Hmm.
U.K., Australia, especially when you compare what our government and IRCC has been doing compared to the U.S. Now
Oh
things
yeah.
might change a little bit with the change of the U.S. government, which we won't get
Yeah.
into,
Okay.
but Canada is a great option, right?
Yeah, well, and this, one thing it's interesting, we talk about, you were asking me about corporate versus personal, often the two are intertwined, right? So, um, examples of guys that, yes, they want to open up in Canada because it's good for business, but really it's a parachute, an exit strategy for the leadership. They want to be here because they want to get PR in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a good play. And they're choosing Canada over the US because we're stable and predictable, right? We
Mm-hmm.
have great programs. We're really facilitative. It's a great economic environment, and you can still gain access to that whole U.S. market from here, right? But for
Absolutely.
folks that are looking for another place to be, we still represent a very different opportunity than the U.S. Not to beat up the U.S. I mean, they've had their woe. All of our pals in the U.S. immigration world, the last 4 years have been hell,
Yeah.
and I really feel for them, and now it's no longer, there's optimism, but there's still just endless uncertainty,
Yeah.
right? Because they've got to get everything passed, and then they've got to get things entrenched, and they actually have to get, the USCIS actually working. But
Yeah.
anyways, I do think that
That's
we
for
we
another
are a really
episode.
good opportunity, and it's yeah, we can talk about that for a long time. But I do think Canada remains just a beacon, right? So yes, there
Absolutely.
are challenges, and yes, there's going to be some near-term issues, but I do think this is going to be a phenomenal year for people that are looking to make the move, right? I think there's some great opportunities here, and I'm really hoping we can see processing times come down. That would be a nice benefit, right? Because I know we talked a
Absolutely.
little bit about, what's the option here, adding more programs. Well, we love our pilot programs, we love to expand them, but can we maybe just get our processing times down first for core programs? Wouldn't that be a good thing?
Yeah, I don't want to open up that can of worms because I could probably go for another half hour there.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
totally agree. There's enough students and PR applicants waiting for processing right now. Let's get those
Oh, yeah,
processed first. But anyways,
yeah.
I do want to get to just a couple comments and
Sure.
questions we have. But Ken, before I do that, and if anybody has a comment or question, feel free to throw it into the chat. Ken, if people want to learn more about you, your company, your services, where do you recommend that they go to find you?
Yeah, two ways. You can hit the website. It's pretty straightforward. It's just nicolane.ca, or just look at my profile. I tried. I always say, if you've got a serious inquiry, you want to reach me, probably best to the website. You can catch me pretty quickly through that. Um, I appreciate all the connectivity and all the activity on LinkedIn, but man, I'm not sure about you, Justin. My inbox on LinkedIn just gets buried, and stuff just gets lost, right? And I try to be really diligent on it, but you're better off hitting the website.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we'll link to that in the
Yeah,
description as
sure.
well on either Facebook or YouTube. So, our first question was from Divya. How can an internationally educated nurse come to Canada? Um, so, I mean, there's a few ways, Divya. I mean, we could talk about a few. I can let Ken talk about a few as well. I mean, it kind of depends on the pathway, right? Do you want to come directly through work, maybe PR? Try to get a job through a work permit. Do you want to come and study first? Do a post grad degree. Any thoughts for Divya there, Ken?
Yeah, the first path is always, I always look at those kind of questions, and for me, it's path of least resistance, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
the first step is always take a look at express entry, see how you score. If it makes sense, that's a nice, clean, easy path. Education is a great path, if you can come in and do a degree, but, as a foreign student, and I'm sure you're well aware, Josh, the costs for international students are not low, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
remember looking at master's programs for a 1 year, and it was something like 17,000 for an international, and it was 5 or 6 for a domestic. So I absolutely love our streams around immigration and education, and I love the pathway we create for students. I think it's really world class and leading, but again, it comes at a cost.
Yeah.
So I would start typically with express entry. I would look at the education side, but certainly if you're in a situation where you can find a position in Canada, that's a great option too. But that's just a tricky game. And I don't know what it looks
Yeah.
like in healthcare right now because it's just not an area we specialize in. But I would presume that demand would be relatively high. The challenge around things like nursing is just the accreditation issue, and I'm not sure how that fits in with the provincial associations, right? Because I know that there's all those kinds of additional pieces. So express entry, education, and then work.
Love it. Great answer. Varun says, hey, Josh and Ken, thank you for sharing your thoughts and story. Our pleasure, Varun. Thanks for tuning in. Varun has a quick question. How easy or difficult is it to launch a startup or an entrepreneur for a recent immigrant? Any track records or background checks, immigration policies? It's a good question, Varun. We actually have some information on the startup visa in the Visto portal, so you can definitely check that out. We also talk about some other entrepreneurial or investor type streams. Ken, do you want to talk? I don't know if you do much work in this
Yeah.
area. If you do, happy to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and one of the favorite programs is the owner operator LMIA, right? Um, Having said that, I think that literally just disappeared. And just because we had conversations, at least one of the team members did, with an officer the other day, and they're changing the requirements for that. So unfortunately, I
Oh
think
wow.
that path, yeah, I think they've basically made it such that it's pointless, right? So it was the case where you could come in, and as long as you had a good corporate setup and you had a reasonable investment, you had a good business plan, and you had an existing business somewhere else or had a track, it was relatively easy to get an approval. And that also meant that on approval of that, you could then immediately apply for PR, and it was a lovely approach, right? And now, if I understand it correctly, and this is not been telegraphed by the feds, but from what we understood the last couple of days, you're now in a situation where you need to have existing businesses, you need to have bricks and mortar, you need to have staff on the ground, you need to have a flow of cash locally, and it needs to be at a quite significant level. So for the average user, I think that's gone. So really, what we've been doing more of is just intercompany transfers, right? So the company gets set up here, gets established, and sets them up as an intercompany transfer into Canada, and builds out that way. And that's been a really good mechanism, right? So I do agree. I think there's a lot of different ways you can do it, and just a lot of it comes down to whether or not you have an entity somewhere else, what kind of funding you have, do you need additional funding, and at that point you're looking at, startup visas and all the rest. But I do think that we have some good streams for it, and it just takes a little bit of research, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, Varun, definitely check out in the portal. I have a tab on the startup visa, especially if you're looking for tech. I mean, there's your first step there is going to be you'll need to get what's called a letter of support from one of the designated funds or incubators and stuff like that. It's
Yep.
definitely definitely an option. And then as Ken said, I mean, there's multiple others. We cover them in the portal too. So we talk about the owner operator LMIA. Ken, thank you for that. I'm gonna have to look more into those
Yeah,
details.
and
And
you're not going to find it. That's just
I know
anecdotal.
that.
But I know KPIC has been concerned about this, and I think that program, just for your reference, is probably going away.
That's really good to know because you can't even find owner operator LMI information on the Canada.ca
I know,
website,
right?
as you
But yet
mentioned.
it's been active and really busy and popular for like a
Yeah.
decade. So
Anyways, the last one I'll quickly mention is the investor PNP streams. Again, Varun, we talk about it in the portal. If you can meet certain net worth thresholds and investment, amount of your net worth you'd be willing to invest, then that could be an option as well.
pretty big
Varun
dollars
says,
though.
yeah, big dollars. At least mid six figures, if not a little bit higher.
Yeah.
Varun says, thanks a lot. He gave us a big smiley face, Ken. Just wanted to pass that along. Ken, thank you very much again for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
We will talk. It's good. Thanks for having me out.
All right, and for everyone who tuned in, thanks very much. Make sure to check us out at visto.ai if you want to sign up for the free platform, get help with pretty much everything we just talked about, especially express entry, study permit, work permit, all that stuff. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good rest of your